This is the first time I've ever spoken about my faith in public in quite this way. So, but I do as I'm asked by the Franciscans. But the truth is that it has really been an amazing source of comfort and of joy for me throughout almost all my life. And I was very fortunate to grow up in a kind of peace and justice parish in southern Illinois. And one of my favorite things as a very odd child was to sneak off at recess and hang out in the church by myself, where I would just, it was beautiful there with just me and chatting with Mary and the votive candles. And maybe it was partly because I did not excel at softball, but it was also because I just loved to be there. It was a very comforting place for me. And I have never experienced church as anything but welcoming, even though I know that so many have not had that same happy experience. In fact, so many at this point of my friends and family have left over the abuse scandals in particular that I often feel I could write a Catholic version of that book, Bowling Alone, and call it Praying Alone. And I was covering the Vatican at the time of the height, really, of the American sex clerical abuse scandals about 10 years ago. And it was terribly discouraging hearing so many leaders deny that there was a problem, blame the press for the problem. And I even took a small break from practice, which was a very big deal for me. But there was such a distance between, the height of this very high church experience in Rome and the depths of really the depravity and the evil of this scandal that I really felt I needed to step away from it for a while. The timing was not the best. I was going through cancer treatment at the time. And so it was maybe not the best time to have been denying myself communion. But what I did do was sort of return to my habit of hanging out in churches with just Mary and Jesus and me. And sometimes Caravaggio. And so every day I would just go and sit in a different beautiful church. So I guess you could say I was going to church even when I wasn't going to church. But the great thing that happened was when I finally did come back to Mass, and I always knew it would only be temporary, I saw we moved back to Washington, and I saw my parish priest again. He said, "Hey, haven't seen you lately." I said, "Yeah, with these scandals going on, I really needed to take a break." And he said, "If I didn't have this job, I might have been right there with you." And that might sound kind of glib, but I thought, that welcome home with the open arms and no judgment was really important, and it was actually very healing for me, and I think is what the church should be. But so amid the sometimes discouraging news about the very human institution that's our church, sometimes I wondered if my determination to stay wasn't just pure stubbornness. This semester, I'm doing a fellowship at Harvard, very secular place. And because I'm meeting a lot of people who haven't known me before, it's been kind of funny how often someone will say, "Oh, Melinda writes a lot about the church." And the response, an amusing number of times, has been, "But you're lapsed, right?" So I was at a dinner the other night, and the hostess said, "Oh, Melinda writes sometimes about the church." Again, "You're lapsed, right?" And, "Well, no." Next question, "But you're pro-choice, right?" No, again. I was worried for a minute if I was going to get dinner. But you know, I'm such a contrarian that for me that would be a reason to dig in your heels and stay. But as much as I write about all things Catholic, all of us who cover religion for mainstream institutions really tend to focus, of course, on the politics of faith rather than on faith itself or, you know, heaven forbid, God. And I guess my biggest criticism of the coverage in general is our emphasis on sexual matters to the exclusion of almost everything else. You know, Benedict did talk about the excesses of capitalism as well, and that almost never got any attention. One of my church friends says he doesn't know who's more obsessed with sex, the church or the media. The very lovely Roger Ebert, who died this week, wrote a piece just recently that I really recommend to you that was in the Sun-Times called How I'm a Roman Catholic. I don't know if you saw it. He said in it, through a mental process that has by now become almost instinctive, these nuns, he means the Dominican nuns who taught him, guided me into supporting universal health care, the rightness of labor unions, fair taxation, prudence in warfare, kindness in peacetime, help for the hungry and the homeless, and equal opportunity for the races and the genders. Yet he could not, he wrote, believe in God. And the only real reason to keep that door of faith open any way we can manage it is not in the end what Andrew Greeley used to call the poetry of Catholicism, as alluring as that is, but because we believe in the good news. And whenever someone who's thinking about going into journalism asks me about it, I always say, only do that if you can't do otherwise. And that's really about how I feel about my faith, that I can't do anything else. And I see that as God's work, and I see my work as the responsibility not to blow him off, but to respond even when I'd rather not. And, you know, we all have a little different angle of entry into faith. When I was a young lay volunteer right out of Notre Dame in Hayward, California, I lived in a small community, and it was really interesting to me to see, you know, our different ways into that. My friend Susan, who's a really talented teacher, one of the most talented prayers I've ever met. She calls herself God's spoiled daughter, even though other people might not look at it that way. She really, she says she has a Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof kind of prayer life where she's just in a constant conversation with God. Then my friends Tim and Charlie really came in through the door of community and simple lifestyle, and they taught the rest of us a lot about that. And for me, and also for my friend Rose, the service door was always the easiest way in. So even though neither I nor my church always get it right, or even close to always, I really do pray that our church leaves the door as wide open as possible, and that when we're welcoming people in and welcoming people back, I can maybe feel a little less like I'm praying alone. So I would be happy to take any questions that you have.